ask you to, I would ask if you will say a prayer for me. I am going in the morning at 5:15 to the Spine and Orthopedic Hospital at Tucker to have a second hip replacement, which is part of the reason why I'm speaking to you from home instead of in person. And I would ask for your prayers and thoughts because you can't ever have too many prayers. And secondly, I want to say that our center has become actually an international center. We work with women in Honduras and Latin America, and COVID has caused us to have to really spread our wings because we moved to a virtual platform. And in doing that, we have created an audience now that is an international audience. So it's amazing that such a tragedy should have brought something so good to us because it forced us to do what we would not have done otherwise, which was to move ourselves from just doing programs on site to actually having a virtual platform. And there are 109 dioceses in the Episcopal Church, and this center has worked with, in some way or another, about 2/3 of those dioceses. So it's been an amazing 4.5-year journey. We'll be 5 years old this October. It is amazing to me. We started out with just me and a great idea sitting at the Absalom Jones Center across the street from the Clark Atlanta University Consortium. I would invite you to visit us whenever and whatever times you might be able to do that. If you do plan to do that, though, you should check in with us to make sure that somebody is there because we still have truncated hours just because of COVID, and we're still trying to be good stewards of everybody's health. So if you want to know in-depth things about the Center for Racial Healing, I want to invite you to go to the centerforracialhealing.org and spend about an hour there reading our website, and you will learn many things about what we've done. In this 45 minutes that I have to be with you, I want to try to talk about some things that I think are so critical to the whole journey of trying to be on this planet. I think that we get so caught up in trying to fix the world until we really forget about what is the real work we're supposed to be doing. I heard myself say the other day to a group of seminary students, if you don't do your inner work, you will never do anything that's worth talking about in an entire lifetime. And it shocked me a little bit because I don't say things that sound that dogmatic generally to people. But I realized that deep in my soul is an absolute belief that the only work we really have to do is our inner work. The only work in order to be those people that God put us on the earth to be, to become who God put us on the earth to be. And there's a lovely story in Native American folklore that says the old wise ones were talking about how to, where were they going to put the mysteries of life, the deep understandings that you need to get through life? Where were they going to put it so people would really go on a pilgrimage and really look for what they needed to look for? So they thought, well, if we put it in the mountains, they'll just go right there and find it, and it'll be too easy. If we put it in the ocean, they'll explore the ocean and they'll find it quickly. But if we put it in their hearts, they won't even ever think to look there. And it will force them to have to do all of the things they need to do to find what they need to find. Isn't that something? The longest journey, I believe, that we ever will take is from our head to our hearts. From our head to our hearts. We live in this culture. We're part of this church. And all of the ways in which we do things boils down to being so focused on what can we know and how can we analyze it and how can we manage it and how can we package it and what can we do after we've done all of that, instead of asking some questions that have to do with what has this got to do with our souls? What is it that we're really being called to do here while we're on this planet? And who did God have in mind when we got sent to the earth in the first place? And am I in any way getting close to finding out the name of that person. So I want to frame what I want to talk about a bit here with a piece of poetry, because I believe that poetry is just, as David Whyte says, poetry is a language against which there's no defense. And I believe that poetry gets at things in ways that prose cannot. I also believe that poetry makes us have to pay attention in some different ways, because we can't just think about it quickly and be done with it. And it sort of gets into your system, it gets into your soul, and it permeates and works on you. And it's like yeast in the bread, you know, it leavens, it does things that your rational mind isn't even always that aware of. And it's in those spaces that some of what I'm talking about really happens. This poem comes from David Whyte, who's one of my most favorite poets, and some of you probably know him. And if you don't, I would suggest that you might find him very helpful to get to know. You can Google him this afternoon. You can listen to him. He reads poetry in different places online. This little book that I'm reading from is called The House of Belonging, and this poem is called The Journey. Above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again, painting their black silhouettes on an open sky. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside of you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that first bright and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. Sometimes when the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You're not leaving even as the light fades quickly now. In my eyes, you are always arriving. I want to read it one more time. Above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again. And you've seen geese flying. We live here where we watch the migration of geese. Above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again, painting their black silhouettes on an open sky. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside of you, so you can find what resonates with you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that first bright and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. Sometimes, with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You're not leaving even as the light fades quickly now. In my eyes, you're always arriving. We get so preoccupied with the destination. We're so preoccupied with the destination. And we have far less interest in the journey itself, I think, too much of the time. When we come to think about issues of oppression and justice and all of the things that's wrong on this planet, war, peace, gender issues, you could just make a list 8 miles long, and we get all caught up in what are we going to do about all of that? And mostly we're not going to do much because we can't. It's above us. It's beyond us. Sometimes I have to remind myself, God is able to live with the world being in a mess. So what's my problem? God should have the power to just wrinkle God's fingers a few times and swirl things into right perspective and right relationship. But that does not happen for some strange reason. And I have to confess, I'm probably just like you. I get impatient with that and wonder what's the matter with God. And God is not bothered by my little wonderings. God waits for me to get myself together and come back to the core issue of what is my name and how can I find it in this journey that you have in front of me? And how does the process of my finding my name impact what's going on out there in the world? You see, I think that when we think that what we're doing is going out to help other people and save the world and fix things and make things better, we're just delusional. What we're really trying to do is find home inside of ourselves. What we're really trying to do is find what makes it all worth it, what makes it sense out of being here. I mean, it's tough being on this earth if you're paying attention. If I think you can get through life by staying asleep and being unconscious. We can use addictions, and we've all got our own struggles with that. My drug of choice is food. So I have to worry. I don't have to worry. I have to be careful. I have to stay intentional about that, because if I don't, when I get into a pinch, the first thing I'll think about is, what can I eat? Well, what is your drug of choice? Because we've all got one, and we have to pay attention to how that drug of choice dulls us, whatever it is. I'm not suggesting that we're all running out getting illicit drugs off the street, because that's not what we're doing. But we've got worry, anxiety, we've got work, we've got power plays, we've got projects that we're going to do, and we're going to feel so much better because we've done them. We've all got things that will keep us from stopping a minute and just entertaining the sense of being lost, the sense of, I don't have an answer, the sense of, which way do I need to go? When you get to feeling like you don't quite know what's going on and you're unsettled, what do? Do you go to your drug of choice, or do you sit with it? Do you sit with it till you hear a word, till you get a direction, till you know what you need to do? Oh, you say, perhaps I don't know what you thought I might talk about, but if you're exploring your roots and you're looking at who you were and who you were, it's important to explore, but it's also incredibly important to look at who are you now and who do you need to become. And those are not answers that you can find by being in a hurry or being impatient or thinking that there's a destination to get to and you'll have an answer. You won't. The answer is an evolutionary process. The answer is found in being willing to keep going forward. You know that old song about the answer is blowing in the wind? Remember, some of you in the room know that song. The answer is blowing in the wind of the spirit. The answer is to be uncovered. The answer is in finding out what, as Howard Thurman talks about, what was the imprimatur? What was the mark God put on your heart when you got sent to the earth? And now your job is to find out, our job is to find out what that mark is and to live into it in some way. I hope in this fast-paced conversation that I'm choosing to have with you this morning, that you can stay with me. I don't know where everybody is in terms of your inner journey work, but at the Center for Racial Healing, this is the premise upon which we do our work, that if we don't do the inner work, we're never going to do the outer work anyway. We're just going to pretend and play with it, and it's not going to be sustainable, and it's not really going to go very far. I think the reason why the world is still in such a mess and we've worked so hard to fix it is because we ask the wrong questions and we go at it in the wrong way. We have not bothered to look for where those inner connections intersect with what's happening out here in the world. We talk about peace, but we live with inner war. So you can have no peace in the external world if people don't have peace inside their hearts. Because if you don't have any inner peace, you don't really want peace, because it won't fit you. It won't feel right. The reason why we don't let go of our addictions and our issues that need to be let go of is because we've gotten comfortable with them. They help us they make sense to us, and in order to move forward, in order to find the freedom that's in our heart, we have to be willing to let go of the ways in which we have encased ourselves, and encased ourselves by encasing ourselves, we have imprisoned ourselves. This past week, I was a part of a panel on immigration, and we were talking about Isaiah's passage about letting the captives go. And, you know, the captives are not just all the person in prison. We have, we have become captives by the ways in which we have made others captive. Because you can't imprison people without imprisoning yourself in some way, and you have to pay attention to that. So I have a lot of questions for you this morning. Like, what is the nature of your inner journey? What are the things that you think about that you then decide that's too much, too big, let me go fix something? You know, all of us have had this experience. There's a problem that we need to deal with ourselves, but instead of dealing with it within ourselves, we go try to fix it in somebody else, right? Have you ever done that? Do you know what I mean when I talk about that? That you know, I had a friend once who said she bought pimento cheese and said it was for her son. She knew her son didn't like pimento cheese half as much as she did, but she bought it saying it was for him, but she was really going to be the one to eat it. And she didn't need to eat it. And so how many times have we decided that, you know, I've got these things I need to really work on, but this is too much, I can't do it. So you get busy fixing somebody else. So how much attention do you pay to your sense of call to fix somebody else? Sometimes you can find the one line that's been written inside of you by listening to some of that distress. And instead of going out to fix somebody, to sit with it. The Native peoples also have this, have inspired David Wagner to write a poem called Lost. And the poem says, if you're lost in the wilderness, the thing you need to do is stand still. You stand still because the trees are not lost. The trees and the forest, the birds, they're not lost. But if you can't hear the direction coming from them, you are surely lost. So I have come to deeply believe that if we do this work, we'll be surprised if we confront ourselves, if we face up to things that we need to be looking at, rather than trying to explain it, you know, in some kind of way. Whether you're talking about race, whether you're talking about poverty, whether we're talking about gender issues, it does not matter, because at the bottom line, getting myself in the right spot internally gives me the power to see more clearly what I need to be doing in the outer world, and gives me power to actually do something. So you go out into the world, a person who is interested in being well, interested in being healed, to bring the good news that healing can happen. But what we do too much of the time is go out into the world with a whole bunch of brokenness, trying to fix a bunch of stuff, and we end up just making a whole bunch of messes. And we've made plenty of messes, of course, all of us, and we'll make some more. And this is not a conversation about don't do anything. Everybody's got to do something. You know, God didn't put us here just to eat a lot of food and wear nice clothes and live in nice houses and spend a bunch of money. That is not what the journey is about. The journey is about the soul leading us to the wholeness and to the place of understanding who we are as God understands us. It's a good journey, but we have gotten so preoccupied with the destination until we nearly have forgotten to be on the journey. Someone said to me just this morning when I was saying, we're going to talk, someone asked, what was I going to talk about with you all? And I said, I think I'm going to talk about pilgrimage, because I think that we just have lost contact with being pilgrims. We are pilgrims here. And we sing these songs that talk about, you know, this is not our home, but we don't believe that really, because we're trying hard to make it home. We don't really, you know, we are trying to make it home, and we get so caught up in that until we forget to let it go and to really seek how to get home, really. The one place we get home is in our hearts, and we get home in our hearts as we really come to understand what is in our hearts and how to live with what's in our hearts. So I ask you this morning, how do you feel about your heart? What is the state of being in your heart? This is Lent. This is the time for us to be asking questions. this is the time to say, you're talking about your roots. What does your history have to do with being who you are in this present moment? And what in that history do you need to interrogate? What do you need to leave behind? What do you need to take with you? What are the new questions that need to be asked now that as you embark upon this investigation into yourselves? You know how we don't like it when kids ask us questions like, who is God and who made God and how did God come to be? Because we don't know the answer and we don't really want to say we don't know the answer. So we just tell them to go play or something, you know. But instead of telling ourselves to go play or to go get our favorite drink or go shopping in our favorite store, instead of in dealing with these questions, we need to sit with the questions. I love what Rilke says in his letter to a young poet: be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and learn to love the questions. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and learn to love the questions. Because if you learn to love and live the questions, someday you'll live into an answer. And I just, I have internalized that message from Rilke, because there are still so many questions, but there have been answers, and there will continue to be answers as long as we're willing to entertain the notion that this is a pilgrimage that we are on here from birth to death. This is a pilgrimage. If there's any destination, it's the destination when they roll us into the sanctuary for our Easter service in a coffin, if there's any destination. And I don't think that's a destination either, because we're just about getting ready here to proclaim that that's not an end, that's an arrival. So the last line in this poem says, in my eyes, you're always arriving. So we're not dying, even though it feels like we do go through that whole process of the transformation process is one of life, death, and rebirth, life, death, and rebirth, life, death, and rebirth, over and over and over. The pilgrimage allows us these opportunities to be born, to die, and to be reborn over and over. If we do well practicing that in a daily run of being pilgrims on the earth, when we get to the big death, when the soul separates from the body and goes wherever souls go when they leave our bodies, then that'll be an easier transfer, because we will have practiced doing that over and over, instead of trying to hold on to pieces of life that perhaps do need to die. What's in the ashes? What's in your ashes is maybe a good question. What's in your ashes? We put ashes on at the beginning of Lent, and it has a lot of different kinds of signification, but one signification could be simply that there is mystery in these ashes, and it has something to do with us. What does it have to do with you? How are you doing this whole process of getting ready for the celebration, for the Easter celebration that's coming up here in a couple of weeks? How are you relating that to this pilgrimage that we are on? And what's it all about in the first place? I mean, we get caught up in, we get to Lent and we do a whole bunch of different kinds of things, but what are we really doing? What's going on inside? What's happening in your inner community? There is an inner community, my sisters and brothers. There is an inner community. And a lot of what's happening in the external world is simply a projection of all of us putting stuff in our inner communities out there into the world. So violence is an expression of the people in which those acts are occurring. Right now there's a war in Ukraine because there's a person in Russia who's a very violent human being and is projecting that out into the world and has the power to hurt people with that projection. But the truth about it is, it's not just Putin who's violent, it's all of us. And we all have to take some responsibility for the ways in which we help violence to stay concentrated on the planet because of the internal work we need to do. Carl Jung, who I have spent a lot of time studying, says that if we would withdraw all of these projections that we make into the world, if we would draw them back into ourselves and deal with the stuff inside of ourselves, that we would remove evil from the earth. Now, I disagree with Jung because I believe evil is a spirit. I believe evil is spiritual, a part of the spiritual construct. And so I don't think evil is going to go away because we deal with our inner communities. But I do believe this, that evil will be destabilized and evil will be disrupted and evil will be weakened by our dealing with our own stuff, by our not trying to assign what's inside of us, what's in our ashes to somebody else rather than paying attention to what we see written there. So when you look at the ashes that comes here, listen at this imagery, sometimes with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. So what has been written in the ashes of your life? What's there? What do you need to take a look at? What is it that you don't want to look at? You can decide sometimes what you really need to look at by listening to what you don't want to look at. I have to quit blaming my grandmother for being a person who has to struggle with my weight. My grandmother was a great big woman who made peach cobblers, I understand, that had a half an inch of butter floating on the top of them. That can't be good for you. I'm sure it's amazingly good to you, but it can't be good for you. So now as a grown person, I can complain that my grandmother is genetic. I have, the reason why I can't eat everything I want to is because of my grandmother. It's my grandmother's fault if I have to be on a diet. And if I don't stay on the diet and eat right, I'll be this great big woman that can't function well. And it's my grandmother's fault. And then my mother's fault. It's nobody's fault. It is a fact of my history. And I have to decide what I'm going to do with that historical fact. So they didn't have anything to do with it. They didn't create the genetic structure. It is there. So some people can eat everything they ever see and it makes no difference. And if I just look at it, it makes a difference to me, because I'll gain a pound if I pass by the cake plate too many times. And so the point I want to make here is look at the ashes. What's in the ashes? What's written there? What is the message? What do you need to be entertaining out of those ashes as you engage this pilgrimage that you're on? If we do this work that I'm talking about, we will become intolerant of injustice. We won't tolerate injustice because our internal barometer won't let us. We won't tolerate people abusing anybody. We won't tolerate racism, sexism, classism, ableism, because our inner community bears witness against it in every possible way. And we have enough clarity at the core of ourselves to give us the courage to stand up and say whatever needs to be said and to do whatever needs to be done. People always ask me, how do you keep from getting burnt out? My last birthday, I was 76 years old. I've been doing this work since I was a kid in college. Actually been doing this work even before that, because when I was in Arkansas growing up as a sharecropper's daughter, I was a resistor. I didn't have a label for it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew something was wrong. When my mother would take us to the doctor and we passed by this lovely waiting room with white folks sitting in it with lamps and couches, and were led to a hallway with one light bulb and a few straight back chairs, I knew something was wrong. And I wasn't quite sure what the something was, but it was wrong. And so I wouldn't sit down. I would stand up the whole time. If my mother had known that I called myself being a resistor, she would have whipped me, because she would have been so scared that if I kept that attitude, I was going to end up being killed by racism. She would have been scared. I never said a thing. I just didn't sit down. And now I know, as I look back through my root system, I know that I was a resistor because I had an internal barometer that told me this inequality that you're seeing here is not right. And it was out of that in kind of listening to my own intuition, my own heart, and deciding I want to be a free person. I want to be a person who can sit in a nice room. I want the rooms to be nice for me too. What do I need to do to get there? And the answer was stay the course inside yourself. Keep on trying to know who you are. Go get an education. Go get an understanding of what life is really about. And don't say yes inside yourself to these things that something in you tells you it's not right. So what is your inside telling you? You know, what is your inside telling you? One of the reasons why I don't get burnt out is because it's not a head trip, because a head trip won't get you there. It's a heart journey. That yes, our heads are involved. I mean, you know, we're not walking around mindless. Part of our problem is our heads are so involved. We're so smart. We know how to gather material, do analysis, create strategies, and we know how to implement them. But all of that doesn't get us very far down the road. And it gets us to burnout pretty fast too. Because in order not to be burnt out, standing in the world as we need to stand, we got to be sure we're standing in the shoes that we need to be standing in. So whose shoes are you wearing? Are they yours? Your grandmother's, your grandfather's? Customs, the way we used to do it, you know, we got all those shoes, right? That's not how we do it here. When my son, who's now 36 years old, was a little boy, and he didn't like something that I was doing, that I was demanding that he did. He was maybe 3 or 4, and he'd look at me and say, "We didn't do this way where I came from." And you're 3 years old. Where did you come from? You know, and I would say, "Well, where did you come from?" And he just looked at me with this little funny look on his face. And I don't know why he came up with that little characterization for, I don't want to do this that you're telling me to do. The truth of the matter is, where have you come from? And what shoes have you brought with you for this journey that you're on? And are those the right shoes? And you can't know the answers to these questions if you don't stay with this inner process that I'm talking about. What is our allegiance to? Is our allegiance to the journey and to really trying to figure out who we are supposed to be while we are occupying this space here? Or is it to a bunch of ideas? Is it to what other people have told us and how we think we're supposed to be? In the South, we are so good about talking about that's not the way we do things here. And we need to let go of that because God's not interested in how we used to do things. God is, look around you. God is the most creative energy you can ever imagine. Look at the beauty in the world and ask yourself if God is interested in stagnation and sticking to something even long after it no longer works anymore. God is so creative, so imaginative, and so interested in us having the courage to allow ourselves to be free enough to do the same thing. So I don't know. I didn't ask if there's any apparatus here for people to ask questions or make comments. I don't really like to just come and run my mouth for 30, 40 minutes and say goodbye. I would love if anybody has a question. I don't know how your system is set up. I'm happy to have someone ask a question that I can answer that might be helpful to the whole group, if that's the case. But if not, then I can just keep going. So I forgot to ask you before we got started.
We have an owl, which is the device that when somebody speaks, it spins around to them. So the camera that says Church of the Epiphany with those people, and it should be able to pick up any questions that people have. So we ready to open it up?
So I would like to stop right here and give people an opportunity. It won't be a lot of people because we don't have a whole lot of time left. But I want to, I hope, I want you to understand that I'm an activist, but I want you to understand that the only way to reason to be an activist is because your heart has pushed you into activism. And if you are an activist in response to your heart, as your heart meets, Edward Buechner says that vocation is when the deepest desire in your heart meets the world's need. The deepest desire in your heart meets the world's need. Is at that intersection that vocation takes place. We tend to think, I'll go do this, that, or the other many times without asking our heart any questions whatsoever. And then we get out there and find out we don't have what it takes to do it because our heart didn't tell us in the first place. That wasn't where the energy was in the first place. So just don't go away saying, oh, well, she didn't think that we should go be activists. That's not true. And if you heard that, that's not what I said. I said, everybody's got to do something. Everybody's put here to do something. But until you do the inner work, you'll never know what it is. You may work till you die and work your fingers to the bone. But if you haven't done the inner work, you have missed hearing the deepest messages. And it's inner, outer, and we don't get to pick and choose. We have to do both. And we have been so good in the Western world to try to see if we could choose one. And we get all into doing inner work, and then we become no good in the outer world, or we go out in the outer world and work and don't do the inner work, and we're no good in any place when you get right down to it. So questions please.
I have a question. It seems like in order to do the inner work, it seems like time has to pass, that it can't, or I couldn't be in my 20s and have done that work. But I still felt compelled to do something in the outer world. Would you comment on that?
I don't think it has got anything to do with age. I think it has to do with consciousness. And even in your 20s, if you were feeling compelled, something in you was compelling you. The problem is if you probably didn't have an environment that was inviting you to connect that to your inner journey. You were just being told, go, the society, the impetus is, well, you're here, you're supposed to do something, you're smart, you've got resources, go do it. We don't do enough in the church or anywhere else to encourage people to then begin to explore what is it that you need to be doing? So what the messages were when you were in your 20s will be different from the messages when you're in your 50s, but the messages are always there. It's the lack of consciousness in being invited to make those connections. And the way in which we have failed in higher education, in the church and everywhere else is to hold up the inner outer construct as being equal in some way. We always make it seem like if you're going to go do inner work, you want to sit around and navel gaze, and who wants to do that? The world's in a mess. You need to get out here and try to fix it. That's just, haven't you heard that? Haven't you heard the disparaging remarks that are made about people that struggle to see inside of themselves? And we get called funny names and all kinds of things because we don't place much value on that. And that's mostly manifested in the ways in which we don't place much value on mental health. We're far more interested in physical health still today, even though we've gotten better, than we are in mental health. So that, you don't hear a lot of invitation to think about, well, what's going on inside of you when you thought you needed to go out here and do something? And then is the something that you went out and did, was that really the best something? Perhaps it was. And perhaps you can look back at it and say, if I had to do it again, I'd do the same thing. There's no judgment here in this comment. I'm just saying that I don't think that there are enough places where we make that invitation viable and put it up alongside activism as equal. And I believe that inner outer cannot be put into competition because they both have to happen. And I think they are of equal value.
I put a question in the chat.
I'm sorry, I didn't read it. Just tell it to me.
Yes. Well, I was on your website, and I believe you're now offering actually a course with Ken Swanson to give people a space to do inner work. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us, can we register? When are the dates? And
the class is called Spiritual Formation for racial healing or something like that, and it is an 8 or 10 week class. I never can quite remember the complete length, and there is a waiting list always for it. This right now, Ken is teaching the class with people. Some of the people are in Europe because of the virtual platform that we now have. The idea is to provide people a spiritual discipline for doing this work and doing it around race and racial healing. And it's an amazing class. It requires a lot. And you can register anytime and be on a waiting list if the class is full. We have been very hardened by the responses to this class because people do want to do this work and want to do it in a more in-depth way. If we want to save the planet, clearly we need to ask a new set of questions. And I don't think anybody can disagree with that. We've got to find a new pathway. And part of the pathway is through our hearts. And we just, like those old Native people said, we'd rather do anything than go to our heart. Give me a big task to do out there in the outer world, and I'm ready to do it. Tell me to go do heart work. And I'm thinking like Naaman when they told him to go wash in the little sorry river, and he's so upset because he didn't get asked to go to the big fancy river. That's us. That's a very good example of us. It's not so big and fancy. It's not so bright and shiny. It's a deep commitment to navigation inside of our souls that leads us on the journey in some new kinds of ways that I think ultimately is going to help save the planet, if indeed we manage to save it. So please go to the website. That's why I said in the beginning, there's so much on our website. We have got in the last 2 years, we've done over 60 different programs, and most of them are on YouTube. So you can spend a good bit of time just listening to programs that we have done on a variety of topics. Also, my podcast that I do with Chelsea Glasgow as the hostess, we've done 36 of those. So with all different kinds of people. So you can go there. The last few we've been doing this during Black History Month and Women's History Month, talking about racialized trauma. We have just been trying to be good stewards of our resources and putting all these things to make them available to people. So we really do want to invite you to go there. We'll be doing work with Asian American issues during Asian American History Month, and Latinx Month is coming up. We'll be doing some things there. We'll be doing some things around Indigenous people, because we can't just focus on Black, white. We've got to focus on all of the peoples who have been oppressed in this country. And our center is committed to doing that. And you can find references and materials. We're building on these other groups because, of course, I'm a Black woman in the Southeast, so I know more about Black, white stuff than other groups, but I'm learning. And the center is so committed to that. And we are bringing more Latinx and Indigenous people and Asian people into the conversation. And we just finished that wonderful series of Women of Distinction. If you have not looked at that, on our website, where we highlighted me, because I should say as well that I'm getting the Joseph R. Biden Presidential Award for Lifetime Achievement in Service in August. And we highlighted me in the Women of Distinction. And then Reverend Nancy Fausto, who's a young DACA priest, she's 30-something years old and an absolute amazing soul, is one of the Women of Distinction that's there. You can find these on YouTube now. And then Bishop Diana Akiyama, who's the first Japanese American woman, or not just woman, but diocesan bishop in Oregon, and she is highlighted there. And Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, who's the first Native person to have a cabinet position. And then the last person that we just did is Reverend Dr. Cynthia Kittredge, who's the Dean of Southwest Seminary, a white woman who's doing phenomenal work and bringing that seminary up to speed in terms of being serious about racial healing and that work. So I would invite you to go to our website, because it's a pretty good place, and we've got a lot of stuff there. So perhaps there's time for one more question. Just as clear as mud, right? So can't think of. Yes.
Do you think that fear is the thing that manages to keep us in our moving and constantly moving and not going deeper emotionally into ourselves? And also maybe fear that if we allow ourselves to feel the pain of the world, that it will just kind of crush us.
Yes, I think that's right. I think fear is at the core of a whole lot of reasons why we don't do the things God would wish us to do. But, you know, if you think about, God has to bear it all. And if we want to be in company with God, perhaps we need to see if God can help us manage to bear a little bit of it. So I believe that brokenheartedness is part of the result of doing the work I'm talking about. And if we're going to go out in the world to do anything to help other people, we need to take a broken heart with us. And it is painful. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not painful, but it's painful to be on the planet too. It's painful to be in denial, and you don't, you can think you're doing okay, but as soon, one of these days, you're going to get to a place where you got to confront yourself. It may not be till the day you're dying, but the confrontation will come. And it's much better to do it on your own terms and not wait till the death day. So I just have been saying this for a very long time, that I think that if we can, we don't have to go tear down the whole house at once. We can take brick by brick. And if you, as one priest, Reverend Barbara Taylor Brown talks about practicing courage. I had never heard anybody talk about that before. Practicing courage. Every day, she says, do something that pushes you to be a little more courageous, like walking in tall grass in the summer. There might be a snake in it, but you take a chance, or saying hello to a stranger, which maybe you would never have done before. And just every day. And David White talks about being a half a shade braver. So we don't have to get up in the mornings brave enough to go fight a whole war. Maybe we just get up in the morning brave enough to know that the war is going on, to be brave enough to go watch and know that the war is going on. And then to be brave enough to say, God, what would you want me to do? And be brave enough to listen for that tiny thing that we can do. Pray, fast, send something to somebody, go across the street and be kind to a neighbor that we hadn't seen or talked to in a long time. It's the tiny steps. It's the tiny steps. It's the tiny continual saying yes to these invitations. And then one day you wake up and you have come from way back here with this much courage to being way up here with this much courage. And you almost didn't know how you got there. Because every day you've just been saying yes to a little bit more. We say, we create brave space at the center, and we ask people to be a half a shade braver every day. So, but you're right. Fear is so detrimental to courage. And when we sit and talk to ourselves about how horrible it's all going to be, we just get immobilized. If we get up and take the first step, it's not that bad. If you sit in your room and think you want to drive to New York, but it's such a long trip. If you think about it long enough, you won't do it. How long it is. But if you think about getting ready and going to do it, you might find yourself a little bit more able to at least get up. Otherwise, you can just get immobilized and never get out of the chair. So.
Thank you, Dr.
And I know, I was just about to say, I probably sound pretty courageous, but I want to tell you that I go in fear and trembling every day. I go in fear and trembling. I go with brokenheartedness. I go with the belief that God will be present, called or not called. God will be present. And because of God's presence, I can stand up in the world and do what I need to do, even if I don't know how I'm going to do it. I believe that God is faithful. And there's some things you do have to come to terms with. And one of them is I'm counting on it. And if God's not faithful, then God's going to have to show me that lack of faithfulness, which I have not seen yet. I have not seen God not be faithful yet. And I'm continuing to trust that God will be faithful. And so there's some places where you have to say, this is a non-negotiable. It's a non-negotiable for me to let my faith go away, because it's in that assertion that God will be faithful that I keep having the courage to put one foot in front of the other, to ask the questions, to do the work, and to keep going forward. So thank you so much for your listening ears and your listening hearts. And thank you for being on the journey. I love the Church of the Epiphany, and I hear you have a labyrinth. So if you look up and see me out there on it, don't be surprised.
You are welcome anytime, and we're so grateful you've given us a lot to think about today. I'm going to be sitting with that idea of balancing the inner work and the outer work and what that looks like in my own life. So thank you for the gifts of that.
Yes.
Bill, let's close with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let's pray. God, we give thanks that you are a God of liberation and a God of justice and a God of love. We give thanks for the work of Dr. Meeks and the Absalom Jones Center and all those who are working for the liberation of all of us. We pray your blessings on that continued work and for the ways that you challenge us to do that work, first of all, in our own hearts, even as we go out into the world to do that work elsewhere. We pray for Dr. Meeks, for her surgery tomorrow, for all those who will care for her during her surgery and recovery. And we ask that your presence accompany her and accompany all of us as we go forth from this place. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and many blessings to everybody.
You as well.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.